Again, good afternoon and good morning, and thank you for joining today's educational webinar series, Identifying Global Credits and Incentives. I'm your host, David Hickey. Thank you again. I know everyone has a very busy schedule and a lot going on, so I truly appreciate you taking the time to learn more and have an interactive discussion on the process of capturing economic development incentives and really the key part of understanding, evaluating those incentives and identifying how to find them. So we'll get started. I know we have an hour slotted for the webinar session today, but we will, I don't foresee us taking that long. Just a brief presentation, quick introduction of the firm and who I am, and then we'll get into the content, and following that we'll have a Q&A session. Just a couple quick items of housekeeping before we get started. For your convenience and everyone else's, you've been muted upon entry. That way, we can avoid any audio interruptions during the presentation, and as well. So don't worry about it as you come in. That you are muted across. Please utilize the chat function, which should be at the top right of your screen. It depends on some of the different WebEx platforms that you might be using on your desktop, but it should be on the upper right corner. If not, you'll be able to select it across the bottom. So please use that, and feel free during the presentation, if you have any questions, you can direct those to me. Otherwise, you can also put it out to everyone on the team. Then when we reach the end for the question period, please feel free to use that for the interactive conversation, which will open at the end. And then also, we are recording this webinar session, and so we'll have it available online soon after the webinar is completed. If you have any friends, colleagues that were unable to attend, anything that you may have missed if you had to leave early, we will have that available online. And I'll put contact information up at the end, and so I can certainly help get that and direct you to that link as well. So just a brief introduction background on Hickey Associates, who we are at H&A. So we were founded. This is our 32nd year in the business. Today, as the global leader, we have active projects in every corner of the world, utilizing more than 50 professionals in our field. And we'll get into the service in a second. But on an annual basis, we handle about 400 projects. We manage and capture approximately over $3 billion USD. And in all, when looking at cost savings across all of our portfolio of services, it's about a third of savings are delivered back to our client over the life of the project at hand. So what do we do? Number of our service area officing, first and foremost, we are site selectors. We help our clients determine where is the most optimal location in the world and how to get there and how to figure that out and determine it at the most optimal cost and efficiency status. So key part of that, and what much of the discussion today will be on, is economic development incentives. So helping our clients identify, secure, capture, and ultimately comply with economic development incentives, whether those are at the national, state, provincial, regional, utility, municipality, whatever that might be, helping them through the entire comprehensive process. We do a significant amount of site due diligence. Historically, our firm worked on industrial projects, and so there's nothing more important than that site due diligence. Today, with work across all asset classes, that is still an important aspect and piece of the site selection process. On the incentive side, the compliance administration, so ensuring that once you've secured and captured those incentive awards, being able to follow through and file the paperwork, meet those milestones that are required to actually see and receive those dollars. Extensive work with labor analytics, really understanding what the workforce is today, what it will be tomorrow, and not just on a cost perspective, but on an availability, sustainability of a workforce. This is logistics and supply chain of the project and the opportunity today and into tomorrow, and of course on the global expertise. Just a quick an end of the promo there, but myself, David Hickey, Managing Director of the firm, one of our firm's leaders in the Global Incentive Advisory and Location Analytics practice. We've active work mentioned around the world between the Americas, APAC, EMEA, and Africa. And for me, I'm an avid sports fan, political wonk, and proud father of a 2-year-old Cocker Spaniel named Winslow. So let's get right into it. First and foremost, what are incentives? Quick incentives 101. Now, most of you on the call, attending the presentation today, know about incentives. but let's just quickly run through so we know we're on the same page of what we're referring to. So when we are discussing incentives on the economic development side, these are resources and financial support through government entities, regional organizations, and utilities that are provided. They are going to a business. They're going to help with ensuring development, ensuring the creation of the right types of jobs. So in that sense, these resources, these tools, the communities benefit from the jobs and the capital investment which comes into the local region. Meanwhile, businesses, they benefit by reducing costs, discovering additional resources, technical assistance, and project confidence. Just a quick note on those, so additional resources. So most of the time that is financial. So where is that, reducing those costs, reducing that long-term burden that might be, and perhaps it's an additional cost that specific community, that site brings to the company. And this allows to meet some of that delta and to have that in place. But it's not always about just financial considerations, also technical assistance. Some of the different programs we'll talk about a little later, such as workforce recruitment, and the ability to have support. But when you're entering into a new marketplace, and the economic developers, the workforce development boards, other key partners to be able to support and work together, and that project confidence. There are many people that are involved within a corporate team that are looking at a project, looking at a site decision, and incentives can be a key piece to help with that aspect. Are we going to have the tools and resources needed to train our employees? Can we meet those project deltas? Can we consider looking at a second or third phase with the support of incentives and the local community? Important items, their competitive nature, always to remember that, that they are brought forward with the term "but for." So really, without those incentives, would the project go in that place? And it's more and more a requirement for economic developers, for political officials to have that competition and ensure it. Also, the taxpayer return on investment, incredibly important aspect of development incentives, and will continue to be more and more. Are those incentives, those financial resources that are being granted to a company, to a business, is the taxpayer getting a return on investment for that? And making sure that transparency is there, for sure. It's something that we're going to continue to see, not just in the U.S., but really around the world, and more of that activity. And then understanding that concept of discretionary and statutory being those types of programs that are out there that if you create something, if you meet a minimum threshold, you will be able to receive that incentive. State of Arizona's Quality Jobs Tax Credit Program. If you create the number of jobs, you meet wage requirements, you meet residency requirements, you meet capital investment within the first 12 months, you meet all those minimums, you will receive that incentive. There are programs like that around the world. But there's also the idea and knowledge of discretionary incentives. What might the local council be able to provide you if you were to bring a certain number of jobs? What do they have in a discretionary nature, in their discretion, where they could provide incentives? And that is all very overlooked and misunderstood aspect for incentives and real estate decisions around the world. What are some of those types of incentives that are out there? A number of the cash programs, looking at cash grants, what we call forgivable loans. This is where an entity will provide a loan financing, and then if you meet certain thresholds and milestones, they will actually forgive part of that to the company. So we look at that as sort of a cash program. It's return in that way. Other certain tax credits that are convertible to cash, call them deal closing funds, and other aspects where perhaps a U.S. governor can have the opportunity to meet a final delta, a funding gap, and do that through a cash grant program. There are a number of different tax credits, abatements, exemptions, refunds that are out there. Might be on the property side, whether it's real and personal sales and use, value-added tax, VAT taxes that can be abated, exempted, perhaps refunded. A number of different other income, franchise, premium taxes, and the like. Another term that's used and spread for those in real estate, impact fees, and perhaps the rebate reductions on those. Other complex incentives that are out there. These three examples are in the United States, but there are a number of these types of programs around the world. New market tax credits, tax instrument financing, industrial revenue bonds, programs that take a little more complexity, more legal specificity to be able to capture and understand those programs. Texas Financing actually just from the city of Nashville is doing a moratorium on the TIF programs temporarily as the city, the county, other entities can get their head around some of those development incentives that have been put out there and promised in recent months and years. There are other real estate opportunities to look at when it comes to incentives, so reduce to free land, reduce utility costs. Really looking at that, an example is rate riders, as they're called, and the utility that many have their own economic development aspects. It's a very natural direction that some of those entities have taken around the world, but where this is to encourage and to incentivize the business to invest within their region to provide a reduced rate during that time. Lease cost reductions is another one that you find different places. China is one where looking at how much you're paying on a lease in a particular time frame, bringing a rebate, and that rebate ultimately be delivered as a local tax incentive. Other permitting costs, expedited permit process, different items that can be brought through. Again, not necessarily financially driven, financial resources, but other technical support that can come into play. Special opportunity zones are an important aspect to identify and understand around the world. They can be called enterprise zones, economic zones, free zones, special economic zones. There's all different kinds of terms. Really what they mean is they're pre-designated tracts of land where if a company were to invest in that industrial or business, warehouse, data center, whatever it might be in that respective zone, they'll be eligible for incentives. And that can mean different things. It can mean a lot of the incentives that we've already talked about. They'll have that eligibility. So it's a key case in a place, a market like within India. There's really a differential between whether you're in a zone or a designated park or you're not. That opportunity for incentives is going to be drastically different between the two. And then finally, the other incentives just to touch on training grants. So looking at upskilling, retraining, incumbent training, new employee training, really being able to capture grants, capture financial opportunities to support that, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's on the job, developing curriculum, equipment, and even the space itself. And then as mentioned earlier, the recruiting side too, so support with recruitment marketing, job fairs, even intake of applications, and applicant pre-screening as well. So with the overall incentive capture, and as we get into the difference in the process, important to note it's not corporate welfare. Incentives are earned, well, term there's no free lunch. So these are truly public-private partnerships between the company and the economic development organization, the city council, the county, the state, the country, whatever that might be. Always look at the risk and the reward of every incentive. Understand the value, understand what that true long-term opportunity is, but also what are you committing to? What happens if you don't meet the commitments that you make? Understand that for every incentive that you're looking at by program. Understand the term clawback. So if you don't meet a certain milestone that you've committed to, what does that mean? How long? What will you have to pay back? What will the government, the economic developer, claw back from you? Important to know and understand the importance of perception. Looking at your brand, looking at your company. Do these incentives make sense? Do they work? Do they work in the near term and the long term? And what that means for the individual business. And then absolute diligence to compliance administration. We do webinars on their own on this topic. Just knowing that you are meeting those milestones, you're tracking the incentives, you're getting the incentive dollars that are awarded and you've earned, that you're tracking that all along the way. And if there's an issue, if you know there's an issue, no one can foresee the future, but if you don't create as many jobs, you aren't meeting the capital investment, what is that? How can you go back to the community, to the state officials, and have that discussion on the outset and plan through it. So when beginning to identify and look at incentives, when do you pursue them? We're looking at the business life cycle. We're going to break it down into what it can be. Very interesting to this. is there may always be an opportunity to pursue incentives. We're in that business life cycle, whether it's in growth expansion mode, if it's a greenfield, a new startup. Those are really situations to most ideally really always pursue incentives. Always take a look. You don't have to take them, you don't have to accept them, but see what is out there. Understand, identify those programs. Property tax isn't the thing. The income tax, it's a startup, it's not going to have liability for some time. That's okay. But perhaps there's other partnership opportunities that through incentives could help build the business, help improve the bottom line, help the long-term success, such as training grants, as an example. Always understanding, identifying what those are. And then other times, even in a mature phase, a lease retention type scenario. But even the close or reuse of a facility, economic developers aren't very excited about having closed facilities, vacant lots within their jurisdictions. So there might be incentives out there to help you flip that or find that right reuse for the facility itself. What's the global picture altogether? And it's a great snapshot here. So these numbers, they're estimations. There's no single database that holds what all the precedent is out there, but it's somewhere in the $38 to $42 billion range when looking at incentives that are captured on an annual basis. Within the U.S., it's somewhere between 6 and 7 altogether. So this will be a very surprising number because we actually see Europe as a higher figure. Now, again, it's another incentive that it's a webinar that we do on just European incentives, but as looking at how that works across the entire European Union, the incentives aren't the same as they are in the U.S. We'll talk a little bit about some of those nuances, but again, there's another webinar we'll hope you all attend coming up soon, just focusing on those European incentives and what they mean and how that process works. So the incentive capture process at H&A, at Hickey, we look at it basically 5 major steps across the way. So first and foremost, which we're going to talk about here in more detail, is the identification. So looking and understanding what those incentives are there. Is the juice worth the squeeze? And going into the phase of negotiation, so being able to sit down face to face with those stakeholders, with the economic developers, the community leaders, to negotiate out what those incentives could be, back and forth, and making sure it's the best program, best opportunity for the business, while also the community can make sure they are meeting their goals and their mission, which feeds into the legal construction side. So this is the paperwork, the contracts. Incentives aren't just money put in an envelope and handed over. There's a structure to them. There are agreements. There's a legal side to incentives. So working through that legal construction phase to make sure, again, that the incentive programs, those are awarded, are best fit for the company. The company understands the business and knows for that project, here's what we're committing to. And then also the taxpayer can have ensure that their protections are in place, their liabilities are covered as well. And then the final phase being aftercare and compliance, which we just spoke at, but making sure you are capturing or doing what is needed in order to lock in and actually receive those incentives going forward. So as noted today, we are going to focus on identification, really truly doing that evaluation, understanding what the incentives are in place. So when identifying incentives, and we'll talk through this, but as identifying incentives, what I mean here is that we are, you have a project coming up, you have one on the way, you have one that's active, and incentives are part of that decision process. This is really digging in, looking at what is available, what's out there, what are the incentives in my prospective markets that we're reviewing, and looking at just not across the board and a list of those, but pulling together what's real. What are those incentives that are going to best help this project and be the most relevant for that project, doing some of that risk reward. So how do we do that? First step is understanding the project scope. So 3 key items to that. Many, many more that come into it, but really 3 high-level items. First is the workforce. Understanding what is the impact to employment for that project. If it's an existing facility, are you retaining individuals? If you are, how many? What is what is the profile of those individuals? If you're creating new jobs, how many are you looking at? What is that time frame for hiring? You don't need to have the exact specific numbers down, but you should be close in understanding, whether we're talking about 30 new jobs or 300 new jobs. It's an important aspect. And again, what do those jobs look like? What is the type of profile of these individuals? We'll get into wages in a second. Certain economic developers, political officials, state leaders, other entities in this process, the type of people, the jobs that are being created is more important in some cases than creating the numbers themselves. Because if they are going to provide incentives to induce a company to come and invest, they want the economic developers, the leaders want to have a certain type of job that is going to, that again meets their mission. So will they turn away a low wage job? Perhaps not. But the programs that are created that we discussed today are not likely not eligible to pursue that. So understanding, knowing what that workforce is, what the existing workforce is, if it's a incumbent facility as well. So that feeds that into the wages. So understanding, what is the wage that we pay our people? We really pay throughout those employees, that workforce, whether it's in Boston or Bangalore. What are we paying, and what do we expect to pay through new hires, through a new investment? Now, we understand that you may not have that information, or it might be difficult in your role in the business. It's not always in the corporate space to be able to get figures like that, and to be able to understand right off the bat what do we pay our employees? What do we expect to pay them? In Sydney, what do we expect to pay them in Sao Paulo? So we can actually help with that as well, at least looking at on the labor analytics side, to understand what are the expectations for wages in that region. What is that labor cost per employee to that type you're looking at. If it's a software developer in Algiers, we can get a good idea of building out what that labor cost can possibly be and what it looks like to help build out that case as we're going through. But understanding does your company culture do you meet that median wage threshold? Are you typically lower, higher? All that is very important in the expectations for the project, and really understanding which incentives are applicable and what that value is throughout. And then finally, the investment aspect. So this is the capital investment. How much money is being put in and capital really infused into the investment for this project? Capital investment can mean many, many things. First and foremost, it's land, building, investment, fit out, the real estate costs, but it also means into the computers, into different machinery and equipment, the furniture, through on down, into the research and development that may go in at the facility on an annual basis, and as well as the employee and training. What is that? Is that being spent? How is that being spent? When is it? When is that expected? All of that flows into it, and all of those flow into the overall incentive opportunity and what that means for the community, for the state leader as they provide those incentives. So the next part about understanding what are the incentives available is defining the location, the jurisdiction of that project, and where you're looking for this real estate decision. So first, what are those government entities that are in place? The national, state, provincial, county, municipality, village, etc. Identify those. So if you're looking in, say, the Atlanta, Georgia area, identifying, what is the address of the facility that you're looking at? And if you don't have that, what is that? Is there a particular market? So working your way down, and as you go into more of a micro phase and you start, narrowing down and shortlisting the sites, that'll certainly be more pertinent as well. Who are those government entities in place? And from there, identifying, are they the economic development agency? Is there another economic development agency that might be in place there? Or are you working directly with the government, or is there some sort of called a public-private partnership in itself that drives economic development. Some places it's a chamber, some it is a true public-private between some government funding as well as private funding, and identifying who those are, where they're at. Those can be at a state or provincial level. They can be at the regional level. So again, looking at Atlanta as an example, there's a Metro Atlanta organization. In the Milwaukee area, there's a group called Milwaukee 7, M7. Minneapolis, there's a greater Minneapolis-St. Paul that's looking at the region. Other unique ones, such as in Charlotte, Charlotte Regional Partnership, one that actually crosses state lines. So not only represents in Charlotte, but also into South Carolina, select Greater Philadelphia, actually with the 3 states, between Pennsylvania and Delaware and New Jersey, representing the 3. So identifying who those parties are, who those different stakeholders are in the process, and then also not forgetting about the utility providers. And so that's who are likely will be providing utility, especially on the electricity side, and then electric provider to understand is it in the U.S. is it a Duke Energy or SoCal Edison, Florida Power and Light, whoever that likely utility is going to be for that project within that jurisdiction, within the location you're looking at, and identifying who that is, because there are key incentives. As mentioned earlier, the rate rider example, but other rebates, depending on the investment, the type of facility, could be significant tax savings. So, like I said, is assessing unique business project factors. So these are aspects that not every project is the same. Not every company is the same in the way they look at what incentives they're going to pursue, what incentives they're going to look at, how that builds in. And so you have to assess any of the unique business project factors in play. So first, what is the timing of the project? How long is a project going to take? And when are you looking to actually close? When would you be able to begin to even commit to any type of incentives? And this is important as you assess different incentives. So as an example, a city council, as you pursue a property tax abatement or TIF financing, pilot type of opportunity, there is probably some sort of approval schedule. And so being able to meet those dates, whether perhaps the determining committee meets on a monthly basis. So how does that work into the Senate? Maybe the legislation or regulations require 2 readings prior to the ultimate approval. Identifying what those are. There's also other funding rounds. Just in the state of Ohio right now, the Ohio Incumbent Voucher Training Program is now currently available. It is a short window. It's a first-come, first-served window. And so understanding as you're looking out at these incentives, are they available? Is it going to meet within the timing threshold of your project? Especially if you're looking at the federal level, much of that and incentives to help support a project really comes on. It might be a notice of funding availability, a NOFA that can help drive when the application period is. California is a great example of the California Competes Act, where the application windows are only at certain times during the year. Sometimes you don't know when those are exactly going to be, and so looking at how does that affect my business, as opposed to go back to Arizona quality jobs tax credit, where it's an annual. Really you can apply anytime, maybe even after the project started. So understanding what is that timing in reality, what is when you could commit, when you could actually sign, and understanding that through. So the tax liability, critical aspect to assessing, to identifying incentives and what's valuable to the company. First and foremost on the tax side. So what are when it comes to corporate income tax? A lot of different variables, a lot of different driving factors when it comes to corporate income tax and where revenue is driven, where net operating losses might exist within in different countries. In China, if you're a multinational corporation with a joint venture, where is that WFOE? Where is that Chinese entity placed? If that's your regional headquarters, how is the tax driven? Incentives primarily in China are on a local tax basis, and so it's driven on how much revenue you have in that local jurisdiction. And so understanding what is that value, perhaps they come to you, the Chinese, the particular respective government, and here's what we're going to give you 50 million USD over a 10-year period, but you have to have enough liability to take a credit on 50 million. And so how does that work? Now, there are places, there are parts of around the world, especially in the U.S., entities that are trying to work through this and mitigate an issue where perhaps you don't have that liability to earn the major incentive, that major tool that economic developers may have. An example of the state of Wisconsin. Their main program, known as the Business Development Tax Credit Program, which was a consolidation of several different programs that they've utilized in recent years. And through this program, you created a number of jobs to make an investment. You can qualify and capture some significant income tax credits. Well, if you don't have the liability within that particular year where you've earned them, some states will do a carry forward. What they do is it's called a refund. So basically, you receive you've earned $1 million in incentives for that year, but you only have $500,000 in tax liability. You will submit a claim to the Department of Revenue when you file your taxes for $500,000 in tax credits, and then the revenue will see, okay, well, there's still $500,000 that were earned. They will then more or less cut a check for that additional $500,000 to ensure that the full amount is received. Really, a lot of the film tax incentive has created a lot of precedence for this opportunity, because production companies, when they come in and they get these, they earn these tax incentives, they really don't have a whole lot of use for it. And so it's created a large market for the transferability, for the sale as well of the incentives to other entities. Some may share it within their own company, with the parent, but others actually sell it. In the silver state, incentives, many that are earned in Las Vegas for film productions, can then, and other incentives as well, across the board, if they can actually sell many of those incentives to other entities. So the casino businesses are very keen to purchase. You're not going to get 100% on that sale, but 95 cents on the dollar is possible. So your business saves 95%, and that buying entity can save 5%, which in certain realms, certain casino business and in the state can really find and drive significant cost savings. So another aspect when looking at incentives is not to overlook infrastructure. That can be a key part and a key deal breaker when it comes to many projects. Look at industrial projects and the need to have freight rail, certain roads, right-of-ways, wastewater, other utility type of investments, broadband. What are those requirements? Identifying and understanding those as a project is being understood and put in place, because there are many incentives out there, from all the way up from the national, the federal government, to the local and to the utility side, that can come in and can support those requirements. The Florida Job Growth Grant Program is one that's more recently created and used and developed in the Sunshine State, where communities can go to the state and pursue financing, produce several $million at a time, perhaps, to help build out infrastructure. More often than not, it's tied to a single project to help make sure that project can get going. Whether that's wastewater or electric-related roads, freight rail, whatever that might be, but to help develop. So to develop an industrial park, perhaps, that will not only maybe help one project get over the finish line, but then in addition help many projects in the future. So understanding what those are, because there are a number of incentives that can be there. On an office project, perhaps even it's a right-of-way, it's a transportation, it's trying to get a bus line, because that last mile you hear a lot on when it comes to package deliveries, and on distribution ability to consumers, but it's also the last mile when it comes to commuting. How long does it take in some parts of this country where in the United States, getting to a certain location, to an office park, can really mean, it could take an hour, say, to get from your home, your originating point, to the office. You hear often, especially in suburban America, perhaps it's the first part is 30 minutes, and then the final mile is at 30 minutes in itself, as you have to wait, switch to another bus line, or even walk, or take other modes of transportation. There are ways through infrastructure investments, working with economic developers and public-private partnerships to perhaps build on that. Create a bus line, add to a bus line that might be able to help get those employees, to your site, to your facility, in the end. And then other exceptional aspects that can come into play. Are there brand concerns? Are there other partnerships that could come into play in place for it? Is there a time of multi-phase approach to the process, and do the incentives that are out there meet those unique requirements and those exceptional aspects to the investment? So when searching for programs, there are a number of ways to do it, and this is the way, a lot of the ways that Hickey Associates, when we're looking at projects and identifying those incentives. Don't ever be embarrassed to Google. Google is a great way to start anything, to start search, whether you're looking up sports scores or recipes or incentives. It is a great place to start, to be able to build through, especially when you're trying to identify, as we talked earlier, about who are those churches, who are those entities that we need to learn from, that we really need to identify where those incentives are. But that's just the start. To really get in and understand incentives, you need to, again, identify where those jurisdictions are. Who are those entities in place? Who are those economic development organizations? Find their websites and dig in on those websites. They will list more and more. You will be able to find a wealth of information from these organizations. But also have to be wary, because they are, at the end of the day, promotional materials. And so they are the incentives, the programs, and the information that they want you to see. Unfortunately, some organizations aren't quite as transparent as they need to be when it comes to laying out the incentives that are out there, having the regulations available, having any type of precedent, council minutes, whatever that might be, truly having that available. But that's why then taking the next step of going to the legislative websites, and I talk about legislative websites that might be a true government looking at a state legislature, a General Assembly's website, and finding the law and the code, and being able to dig right through it, get into it, understand, asking those questions. What are the requirements? What are the timing? What are those items? And really getting into the law and the code. But it doesn't always have to be that .gov type website. You could also be going into a city council on a local municipality website, and going into the city council, one place, say in the city council minutes, looking at property tax abatements. What is that committee that deals with that? And within those committee files, you'll find the minutes, you'll find proposals, applications that might be, and really digging in to find that additional information, find the precedent, find any kind of rules or what was agreed to for those programs, and really digging into it. And then other subscription resources. Hickey Associates, we have incentivedatabase.com, the large catalog of all those incentives that exist around the world. It's not focusing on precedent, it's focusing on those programs. What exists? What are those incentives that can be deployed within a particular location? What are the eligibility requirements? What are the qualifications to where they are? But there are a number of resources out there on a subscription basis that can help you try to find and track a number of these incentives, whether in the U.S. or around the world. Thomson Reuters, through their some of their client portals, another way to look at and understand international incentives and what those impacts could be, particularly on your tax base, which is, again, one of those major drivers when it comes to MNCs, particularly Western, as they're looking to invest in other parts of the world outside of their home country. So when you're evaluating programs, again, looking at the regulations, the statutes, the policies, what is governing, what is ruling that incentive in that particular program, identifying and understanding what those are. But truly, if you're identifying, you're evaluating a program, you're a practitioner, you're in the base, you need to have these, identify where these are and understand those. Again, knowing the project scope, what is that? What are the thresholds that are in place? Noting earlier, minimum wage requirements, minimum job creation place that might be in play. What are those thresholds? What are the minimum requirements that are put in place for those different incentives? What are the training needs that you might have as a company? What is your approach that your business takes? And what that means is, perhaps some economic development incentives, some training grants require training to be done by another entity, like a community college or a technical school. There are another number of companies, businesses out there that won't do that. The training needs to be done in-house and only in-house. And so for that incentive that is out there, that training resource just may not be applicable. So understanding, identifying that type of requirement when in place. Also the timing, what is the type of training that is eligible? Is that training, it's not just normal training or OSHA training, what is that true skill development? And that changes from program to program. And again, the timing restrictions. So when is the application due? When is the approval process? How long are you going to have to commit for? When is an incentive actually received? All those items are key to understand when evaluating programs as you identify them to work best for you. So ultimately, in the end, making sure you're doing the due diligence. So what is the real value of the incentive? Going back to the tax liability as an example. Is it really worth $1 million? If you don't have $1 million worth of tax liability, it is not. It's worth whatever your liability is ultimately during the life of the incentive. So understanding what that real value is, and what is in place. What are the commitments that you're making for the business? So what kind of job levels are you committing to? What are the wages you must hit? What's the capital investment structure and time frame, and understanding what that is. And also another aspect, not just the project itself, but in some incentive programs require statewide retention of jobs, statewide investment levels. And so just because you're committing to 50 jobs in the city of Springfield, it matters of what you retain across the state of Illinois over that time frame to be eligible and to capture the Edge Tax Credit program. So it's very critical to understand what those commitments are and what's in place. If you have 2,000 jobs today in the state of Illinois, and you're going to create 100 jobs in Springfield, and so putting your headcount at 2,100 within 3 years, when for each of those years following through for the next 10, you need to have at least 2,100 jobs in the state of Illinois. So it's important to know and to understand and identify that at the outset. What are those fallbacks if you don't meet the commitments? What may you owe to the government, to the economic developer? What are the commitments? What is that cost of the commitment that if you don't make it, that if you don't make the commitments that are in place over time? In some places, some incentive programs, it may just be that you don't receive the program. You don't receive any incentive. You don't do it. Call it post-performance. If you don't perform, you don't get paid. You don't get the incentives. That's how it works. But there are others where maybe the incentive came forward and you have negligence. You may have to actually pay back that incentive. Some programs may actually have a penalty on addition to that. In the state of Connecticut, with their forgivable loan program, if you don't meet the commitments, which includes a statewide retention commitment for jobs, you not only have to pay back the loan that you've agreed to, but it's even a higher interest rate. So very critical to understand what those callbacks are if you don't meet the commitments, and then what the steps are to secure. How hard is it going to be to secure these incentives? What are those steps? Are these even steps in a process that the company is willing to commit to? The companies can't go all the way through. Public concerns that could be out there. What are those requirements that are going to be in place for the business to have to put out there? What type of transparency does that? What does that mean in transparency? What type of proprietary information may be out there? Just some of those different steps along the way that'll be in process. Is there going to be a city hall meeting and public hearing companies just will not pursue incentives that have that type of public image and aspect to the project. So again, there are the four key main steps of the incentive capture. Today we focus on the identification. So really that evaluation and understanding where the incentives are, what incentives are available, what are those risks, what are the commitments, what is that true value of the incentive. Then once identified and understood, going into the negotiation phase, we're working to figure out what are the best incentives, what is the community willing to offer, what can they offer, going back and forth, making sure it works best for both sides, constructing that through the contracts, agreements, and the like, and then in the end, complying. So with that, again, appreciate everyone taking the time. I don't know if they're want to open it up now. Promise to keep this within the hour. So if there are any questions, please feel free to utilize the chat feature, depending on the WebEx platform that you're logging into. It's either in the upper right or the center bottom of the screen. You can put that question to the entire team or the entire attendee list, or you can just post it to me. So thank you. The first question that came in is on, is this slide deck available? So it will be as in the form of recording, as we have been able to digitally record this presentation today. It will be available through our website at www.hickeyandAssociates.com soon after the webinar. If you like any questions, I'll have my contact information up on the next screen, and feel free to reach out to me directly, and I would be happy to direct you to where that presentation is. Thank you. Please explain transparency further. So it's a great question, and it's something that is very important for anyone that is pursuing, reviewing, assessing incentives, is what are those transparency requirements that are going to be on the company? What is the company going to have to provide to the government, to the Economic Development Agency, in order to secure and capture the incentives? In the long run then, in the compliance phase, what is that? What are those details? And it's really overall then, what is the state going to put in the public sphere as well? You're seeing more of these databases coming up around the world that list the incentives that were provided, usually on a value basis, and maybe what the job commitments were, what was the investment, who the company is, what is the long-term payout. This is only going to increase, continue to expand on what that is and that space. Particularly the ability to audit these incentive opportunities and what is being pursued and captured across these. So it's an important aspect to identify in the early outset of the project. So thank you. All right, well, I want to thank everyone again for taking the time out of your schedule to join us. Again, as promised, my contact information is up there on the screen. I certainly encourage everyone to join the conversation, whether it be through email, but particularly you can find us on Twitter. Our handle is @SiteTrend, so SITETREND. We're constantly, sharing very neat stories, topics, research, ideas that we're bringing from Hickey, but also throughout the industry and throughout the community. And then as well as you can find us on LinkedIn, Hickey Associates LLC. And please visit our website at www.hickeyandAssociates.com. So thank you again for taking the time to join us for today's edition of the educational webinar series, Identifying Global Credits and Incentives. Thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day.